here we go, Garth. Well, at least she learned how to speak a little
Only swear or affirm
quicker,
the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
and not speak so slowly. See how this one does. A miniature Chad.
Thank you.
Chad's mini-me.
All right, you can go ahead and inquire.
Would you state your name and spell your last name for the record for me, please?
Garth Daybell, Daybell.
And Garth, can you tell me what your relationship is to Chad over there to my left?
Chad is my father.
Okay, and can you tell me how many brothers and sisters you have?
I have 4 brothers and sisters. I'm the oldest, and then 2 brothers, 2 sisters.
Okay. Now, I want to start out by saying that at the time your mother had passed away, and if at any time, Garth, you need to take a break or have a drink of water, please tell me, okay? At the time your mother passed away, who was living in your dad and mom's home?
So in my parents' home, it was my dad, my mom, and me.
Okay. And in terms of the sleeping arrangements, how were the bedrooms aligned in that house?
So at the end of a hallway, there was, on the left would have been my bedroom, and on the right across the hall would have been my parents' bedroom.
Okay, and if you were to estimate, and you only have to estimate, it doesn't have to be scientific, how far would you estimate is the distance between the bed you were sleeping in the one bedroom and the bed that your mother and father shared in terms of feet?
So I would estimate about 20 feet between the 2 beds.
Okay. Now I'm going to switch around a little bit and go on a couple of other different topics, so please bear with me, okay? There is a method to this madness, I guess, but do you have a recollection, and I want to say prior to 2000, not John Pryor, but prior to 2017, who was driving the Dodge Dakota?
Prior to 2017 was my dad.
Okay, and then after 2017, was your dad still driving the Dodge Dakota?
He was not.
Okay, you're sure about that?
I am sure.
Okay. Who was driving the Dodge Dakota?
It'd be my mom.
Okay. Okay. And she was primarily the one driving that?
Oh, I think I have it backwards.
Well, that's what I want to ask you, and I want to make sure that you're being accurate about this. So prior, and maybe I confused you by doing that. At the time of your mother's death, do you know which vehicle your dad was driving?
My dad was driving the Dodge Dakota.
Okay. And is there a reason why are you nervous?
I am.
Okay.
Nice.
Do you share your father's introvert personality?
I do. I consider myself pretty shy.
Okay.
Oh, God.
So at the time, and I'm going to go back, and this is prior meaning before 2017. Again, do you know who was driving the Dodge Dakota?
But before 2017, it would have been my mom.
Okay. And then do you have a reason as to why that changed? Do you recall?
If I recall, it had something to do with car troubles.
Okay. And then your mother started driving a different vehicle?
She started driving an Equinox.
Okay. And was that her primary vehicle?
After 2017, yes.
Okay. But there were occasions when they switched off, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. But primarily your father would be the one seen in the Dodge Dakota, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Now, I want to talk about the summer of 2019 and in regards to raccoons. What do you recall about that summer in regards to raccoons?
That summer, I was testing out a new tent, and out in the backfield, and I heard a rustling, and I went out and I looked up into the tree and there was a raccoon there. And so I ran inside and I told my dad, there's a raccoon. And it was very close to where our rabbits were being kept. And so I told him, and we went out. He grabbed the shotgun and he shot the raccoon.
And was that in the evening? Was that during the day? When was that?
It was about 10 at night.
Okay, so an evening.
Yeah.
Okay. Was it exclusive that you would only see raccoons at night, or were there occasions when you would see them in the morning or the afternoon?
I saw them at night, except for when we had trapped them.
Okay. And you had trapped them during the day
Mm-hmm.
when they were raiding your, what were they raiding?
The rabbit hutch, or it was a rabbit pen. We had set up a fence.
Okay, so they would come in during the day to go after your rabbit food or rabbits?
The food, and we were worried they would go after the rabbits eventually too.
Okay. Did you have an occasion to catch other raccoons during the summer of 2019?
What?
We did.
How many other raccoons did you catch during the summer of 2019?
It was 3 or 4, if I remember.
And do you have a recollection of approximately where on the property those were buried?
We typically buried them in the compost heap behind the silver shed.
Okay. Were there other animals that were buried in a different place on the property?
Yes.
And where would those other animals be buried?
Animals that were more of pets, we would bury out near a raspberry patch.
Okay. So it would be unusual for your father to put a raccoon in the raspberry patch then. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. So would he typically tell your mother if he did something like that?
Yes.
Okay. Was the silver, and what did you call it? The behind the what?
Silver shed.
The silver shed. Was that getting full at some point?
The shed was pretty, or you mean the
ground around the shed is where you were putting them in the compost.
I would think so. There was a few animals in there.
Well, more than a few, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So at some point you also set traps for the raccoons. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Who did you get the traps from?
Our neighbor, Matt Price.
Okay. And at some point, was there issues with the operation of that trap?
Sometimes they could get in and get the food without the trap activating.
Okay. Okay. Now, and when that happened, would that mean the door wouldn't close, or what would go on there?
So the door would remain open, but the food would disappear.
Okay. And was that happening throughout the summer?
It was.
Okay. And eventually, did you catch that big raccoon?
There were so many, I don't remember.
Okay. And at some point,
I apologize to interrupt. There's just an issue I want to bring up briefly on a sidebar here. All right, thank you, counsel. The court had that quick sidebar. It was nothing to do with any question or any impropriety of a question or objection or anything like that. It was simply a matter of management of witnesses in the case. And so because the issue came up and we need to address that briefly, and given the timing, Mr. Pryor, I think it would be good to just break for lunch, then we can sort that out. You can continue with direct.
Okay.
So we'll go ahead and take the lunch recess. We'll take an hour. So if we can come back on just before 1 o'clock, that will be when we'll resume. Thank you.
And we're back.
All right, we can have the jurors brought in, please. Yeah, let's have the witness return to the stand first. Thank you. You may.
All right, please. Please, all President Counter for Your Honor.
Thank you. Please be seated. All right, welcome back, everyone. I'd like to remind everyone here in attendance, there's a courtroom conduct order in effect, and I appreciate everyone complying with that thus far today. We're on the record on CR 22-21-1623, State of Idaho versus Chad Daybell. We just concluded the lunch recess, and Garth Daybell is on the stand in direct examination. If you'd like to continue with your direct, Mr. Pryor, you may at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. All set, Garth?
Yep.
Okay. Now, Garth, before we go forward, we had previously been talking about the raccoon in the cage. But before we go forward, how many times prior to today have we spoken together?
I think no more than 3,
Okay.
including today.
Okay. If you include today, we did speak yesterday for a brief time. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did I tell you anything to say, or did I encourage you to testify a certain way?
No.
Did I give you any advice of any kind?
The only advice given was to just tell the truth.
Okay. And you're prepared to do that today?
Yes.
I want to talk about the September 9th of 2019. Do you recall that?
I think that if I recall correctly, that's the day that I drove home.
Okay, and about what time did you get home that day?
So I got home from work about a little after 4, because that's when my contract hours ended. And so it'd take about 20 minutes to drive home, and I pulled into the back driveway.
Okay, and hold on a second. I guess I didn't cover this very well. You are currently employed as what?
I'm a 8th grade science teacher.
And where do you teach?
Madison Junior High in Rexburg.
Okay. And at the time in 2019, were you working as an 8th grade science teacher?
I was.
Okay. And did you have another job as well?
That October, I worked as a scare person at a local haunted house.
Okay. Okay. So on the date of September 9th of 2019, you had testified that you were just getting home. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you have an occasion in that, and was it late afternoon or evening? Do you recall?
It was late afternoon. The sun was still up.
Okay. Did you have an occasion to talk to your father?
I did. As I pulled in, he came up to me. He was in work clothes and
All right. Now hold on. When you say close, what does that mean?
yard work.
Okay.
And he sounded very excited. He said, "Hey, Garth, I killed another raccoon."
Okay. Was that the raccoon that you folks were having difficulty with that was breaking out of the cage?
I believe it was.
Okay. And did he express that to you that he finally got that raccoon?
He did.
Okay. And then at that point, did he show you where he buried that raccoon?
He showed me that it was buried behind the silver shed.
Okay. Okay. Did he ever say to you that he buried a raccoon in the pet cemetery?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Okay. Now, are we confusing the raccoons? You know that you buried some in the silver shed. Is there possibly that some were buried in the pet cemetery?
I think they were all buried behind the silver shed.
Okay. Now, we talked a little bit with your sister about your mother's health issues. What concerns did you have about your mother's health?
I was concerned that she was getting tired extremely easily, that she would work extremely hard all day and then just come home and collapse.
Okay. And did you ever encourage her to seek medical help?
I did. She had hurt her arm, and I wanted her to go get it looked at. She was trying to rub this bruising ointment on it.
Okay.
She refused to go.
Okay. At some point, she did go to the doctor for the injury. However, do you recall that?
I don't recall the exact time that happened.
Okay. Were there other issues that you had concerns about your mother's health?
We worked in the yard together a lot, and I was her muscle. She would direct me where to dig and move stuff and cinder blocks and garden things, and yeah, she had a hard time doing those heavier things.
And why do you say she had a hard time with it?
She would get really winded really easily.
Okay. And is that something that happened in the last year of her life, or was that the entire time that you knew her?
I would say it became increasingly more towards the end of her life.
Okay. Okay. Were there any other concerns about any sort of other medical issues of her being able to keep her balance or anything like that that caused you concern?
She would have fainting spells.
And how often would that happen?
It was usually after she'd been kneeling for a while.
Okay. Was there ever a discussion in your family about her having some difficulty in the temple with kneeling?
Yes.
What was that concerned?
Objection, Your Honor, this calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Okay. I want to go back to the incident with the paintball gun and your mother. Do you recall that day?
I do.
It was approximately the 9th of October, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall where you were at that point?
I was on the couch
Okay, who was home at that point?
It was me watching TV and my dad was working on the computer.
Okay. And then at some point, did your mother come home?
She did.
And how did she approach you when she got home?
She came in really panic stricken, saying someone had attacked her.
Okay. And did she say with what?
She said with a paintball gun.
Okay. Did you have a discussion with her prior to taking any action?
So when she said that, I was filled with rage and I wanted to go find whoever had done this. And but before I chased after someone with a gun, I said, "Are you sure it was a paintball gun?"
Okay.
And she said, "Yes, it had the thing on top."
The thing on top. What do you mean the thing on top?
I think she was referring to the hopper on top where you put the paintballs.
Did she specifically identify a hopper on top of that gun?
She did by showing me a picture on the computer and pointing to the hopper on the picture.
Did she Google a picture?
She did.
And she showed you the picture on the computer?
Yes.
Now I want to go with one other topic. At some point, your father and your mother and you were there. Is that correct?
Yes.
And were all of you looking at this image on the computer?
Yes.
Okay. And then an officer by the name of Coulter Cannon showed up at that point. Do you recall that?
I do.
And at some point, did you or your father and mother show Officer Cannon the picture of the paintball gun on the computer?
We did.
And who was present when that took place?
I believe it was my mother, my father, and me and the officer.
Okay. And is there any doubt that you showed the officer the image on the computer?
There's no doubt in my mind.
Okay. I'd like to move on and again, if at any point you need to take a break, you let me know. Or if you need some water or if for some reason you let
I'll
me know.
take a quick sip.
Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about the evening of October 18th. Okay, and that was the evening before your mother passed.
Yes.
Okay. You were working that day, and you mentioned something about in October you were working at a scare what?
So there's a local haunted house in Teton, Idaho, which is about 20-ish, maybe half an hour away from where I lived, and a seasonal attraction that I would go work. I'm dressed up in a costume to scare people.
Okay. And at that point, did you have an occasion before going in to do that to come home
Come home from?
from your first job?
Yes.
And walk me through that as to what after you got home from work from the first job, what did you do next?
So I came home, and Mom usually came home before me, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And she told me, "I just don't feel good today. I don't want to cook tonight. Can you go get some McDonald's for us?"
Now that's a long way to a McDonald's, is it not?
Well, I mean, we're used to driving into town for various things,
So
so
then what town did you drive to for the McDonald's?
Rexburg.
Okay. And forgive me, I don't recall if there is a McDonald's in Rexburg.
There's two.
Oh. Okay. Then did you get some food for you folks?
I did.
Who did you get food for?
So I bought food for me and my father and my mother.
Do you recall what you got for your mother?
Her favorite meal was the quarter pounder with cheese.
A healthy meal.
Depends.
And anything else?
I don't remember if she wanted anything else with it, and fries.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like I got her a combo.
And then you went to work at the Haunted Mill. Is that what that's called?
Yep. So about 7-ish, I left, and she was sitting on the couch and said, "Have a fun time. We'll see you tomorrow. I'll let you sleep in."
Okay. And then at some point you got home at about what time?
So I got home about 1 a.m. shortly after that.
Okay. And then at that point, again, you previously testified the distance between your bedroom and your mother and father's bedroom. Is that right?
Yes.
And the distance there was about how far?
About 20 feet.
Okay. And then at some point, did you hear anything coming from your mother and father's bedroom?
As I passed their bedroom, I heard my father snoring.
And is it clear that it was your father snoring?
Yes.
Okay. You had no other indication of that your mother was snoring or making any noise?
I didn't hear anything of that sort.
You didn't see any images in the bedroom of any kind of a struggle or a fight or any kind of an altercation, did you?
No, as far as I knew, it was a normal night.
Okay. And then at some point, what did you do after you went into your bedroom?
I got on my computer and I watched YouTube for a few hours,
And when you say a few hours, what does that mean?
till about 3 a.m. So
Okay.
2 hours-ish.
Okay. And then at early in the morning, at some point, you were awoken. Is that right?
Yes.
And how were you awoken?
I heard my dad saying, Garth, get up. I need help.
Okay.
And I got out of bed and ran over to help.
And then when you walked into your parents' bedroom, what exactly did you observe?
I observed my mother had rolled partially out of bed with her legs entangled in the sheets. And my instinct was, oh, she needs help. So I immediately grabbed her by the shoulders and lifted her up back into the bed.
Okay. And at that point, you felt her arms were cold?
Yeah, I felt she was cold and stiff and
Okay.
she was gray, and I realized she's not been breathing.
Okay. Okay. And at some point between the time you got home at 1 o'clock and the time you went to sleep at about 3 o'clock, did you hear anything or any indication that there was any kind of sound or struggle?
I heard nothing.
Okay. And would you agree that it's close enough that if there was some kind of a struggle or a fight or anything that you would have heard it?
I would have definitely heard it.
Were you present with the discussion with the Flams about when to have the funeral?
I was.
And what do you recall of that conversation?
I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said it seems pretty simple here. We can have a funeral this day or this day, and
Do you have a recollection of which the two choices
I
of days
feel
were?
like it was either Tuesday or Saturday.
Okay. And you could choose, and was it your impression that the family would have been able to choose either day?
I do, yeah. I feel like we would have been able to.
I want to fast forward to a vacation to Knott's Berry Farms. You remember that?
I do.
Do you have a recollection of how long that trip was planned in advance?
Yeah, it was about a week. It felt like a week ahead.
Okay. And at that point, when I say all of you, your family gathered in Rexburg or St. Anthony, is that correct?
Yeah, we were at that house.
Okay. And who was with you at the time when you decided to head to Salt Lake City?
It was my dad and me and Emma and Joe, and that might have been him, or Adam and Leah.
Okay.
Yeah,
And at the time, was Lori Vallow with you guys at that point?
she was not with us at that point.
And then you drove to Salt Lake City, is that correct?
We drove to Salt Lake City to go to the airport there.
And then you flew to California?
Yes,
And at some point later on in the trip, Lori Vallow showed up separately driving to the California location?
she did.
Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about how you discovered that they exhumed your mother's remains. Do you recall how you were able to discover that?
I first heard about it from my sister Emma.
Okay. At any point, did any law enforcement officer ever reach out to you, or to your knowledge, anyone in your family to advise you that they were going to dig up your mother?
No one contacted us. It was a complete surprise.
I want to talk to you a little bit about May 7th of 2021. Do you recall that day for some reason?
I do.
And what happened on that particular day?
It started out as what was going to be a normal school day, and
So I want to stop you there. When you say a normal school day, would that be a day that you were going to teach school?
yes, I was going to go and do my job.
Okay, what transpired on that particular day?
I went out to the driveway to my car, and there were several law enforcement vehicles across the street, and several officers got out and surrounded me and insisted that I go with them.
Okay, do you recall the names of the officers and which agency they were with?
I remember that Detective Ball was there, and
Detective Ron Ball.
Ron Ball,
Okay,
Detective Hermosillo,
that's Ray Hermosillo.
Ray Hermosillo, and then I called him Vinny Kaikamanu.
Would that be Officer Kai Kamano right
That would-
there in the gray suit?
That would be him.
He was one of those that showed up at your house?
Yes.
Okay. And at that point, what transpired?
I told them, "Do you have a warrant?" And they said, "No, but you need to come with us anyway."
Did they give you any choice?
I felt like I had no choice.
And then what transpired next?
They drove me to the police station. They confiscated my phone.
Okay, was anybody with you at that point?
At that point, no.
Did you later learn that they also took custody of somebody else?
Yes, they had then gone up to the door.
Objection, Your Honor. Move to strike that question. It mischaracterizes the testimony.
Sustained.
Okay, what transpired after they took you into custody?
Objection, Your Honor. Again, misstates the testimony. Move to strike.
I'll rephrase, Judge, I'm sorry. After the police officers told you that they were going to take you, what transpired next?
I was taken to the police station, and then I saw that they had also detained my wife and brought her in a separate car.
Were you two kept together in the same room?
We were kept in separate rooms the entire time.
And when you say the entire time, how long did they keep you in the separate rooms?
About 5 or 6 hours.
Okay, at any point did they try to talk to you?
They did.
Okay, and what was the nature of the discussion?
They were telling me that my story was untrue and that I needed to change it.
Objection, Your Honor. Move to strike. Calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
When you say they told you they needed you to change your story or that they didn't believe you, who was they?
The 3 detectives that I've mentioned.
Were there any other detectives there?
There was a Detective Mattingly who was with my wife.
Okay, and at some point, is it your understanding they were doing the same thing to your wife?
She tells me they never talked to her.
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
And at some point, did you ask to have an attorney represent you?
I did.
And at some point and you said it was between 5 and 6 hours?
Yes,
And at some point, were you released?
I was.
Were you subsequently charged with anything as a result of being detained?
I was not.
Did they take any further action with you as a result of being detained?
They did not.
Okay. And then subsequent to that, was there another occasion when you were accused of or asked to change your story?
I was summoned to 2 separate grand juries.
Okay, I want to talk about the second grand jury. Do you recall that?
I do.
And do you have an understanding of why you were summoned in front of the grand jury?
It was made pretty plain that I needed to change my story to fit theirs.
Okay, and in the event you didn't change your story, you would be indicted by the grand jury?
Yes, and they had a list of charges that they were threatening me with.
Okay, when you say they were threatening with you, who are you talking about?
I didn't talk to them specifically
Okay,
myself. I had asked for an attorney who was going in between us.
and who is that attorney?
His name was Forrest Fisher.
And at this point, you are willing to waive your attorney-client privilege and allow Mr. Fisher to discuss the case?
Yes,
Okay. And your understanding of going in front of the grand jury is that you were going to be indicted unless you changed your story?
yes.
And do you know what prosecutorial agency was attempting to do this to you?
I believe it was Fremont and Madison counties.
Okay, and at that point, Did you testify in front of that second grand jury?
I did.
Okay. Now, before you testified in that second grand jury, you had previously testified in a grand jury that was related to your father. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at that point, you told us what you believed was your version of the facts of this case, correct?
Correct.
And at the second grand jury, they brought you in, and the focus of the second grand jury, did you understand that to be you being charged with a grand jury offense?
I understand it. It was that way. I felt very, I was feeling extremely pressured.
Pressured by who?
The prosecutors.
And at some point, you testified in front of the grand jury. Is that correct?
Correct.
Did you tell relatively the same story to both grand juries?
I told the identical story.
At any time, were you ever indicted by the second grand jury brought by the prosecuting attorneys against you?
I was not.
Okay. But you felt that at that point, the purpose of the second grand jury was to try to threaten or persuade you to change your story. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, your faith is you're of the LDS faith. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And how would you characterize? Let me put it this way: would you agree that your faith is maybe different than your father's?
I believe I interpret it differently.
Okay. How would you describe your father's faith?
I would say it's more traditional, meaning closer to the way it was 100 years ago.
Okay. And you've had discussions with your father over the years regarding his faith. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Did he ever talk to you about a plan or a plan that he had in place?
He had
Objection, Your Honor, calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Judge, I'm not asking him if he said. I asked whether there was ever that discussion. It's not hearsay, I don't believe, Judge.
It's sustained.
Okay. Were you aware that your father had beliefs about the 144,000?
I do.
Okay. Was there any discussion? Well, let me move on for a minute, Judge. That's all right. When you talk about the differences between your religious faith and your father's religious faith, can you identify some of the differences that you believe? You believe you're of the mainstream LDS faith. Is that fair?
Yes.
And you testified previously that your father's more traditional or fundamental or more traditional, I guess.
Yes.
And what would be the differences that you identified as differences in interpretation?
Well, I teach and believe in evolution.
Okay.
I teach that to my students.
Okay.
I teach that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, as opposed to 6,000.
Okay. And do you share your father's views on light and dark?
Partially.
Okay, and explain that to me a little bit.
Light and dark to me mean like good and evil, good and bad, opposing forces.
Okay. Okay. And did your mother and father share similar views of fundamental LDS faith?
They did.
Okay. And your mother shared your father's beliefs to your knowledge of this light and dark?
Yes.
What about the idea of putting numeric numbers on people who are identified as either light or dark?
They did that every now and again.
Okay. And they did that in your presence?
Yes.
Okay. Now, your understanding, and I'm going to hack this this person, but I think I previously yesterday talked to you about the book Saints and about a
Dual night?
Newell Knight. And we talked about that yesterday, right?
Yes.
And in that situation, there was a casting of a sword, correct?
Yes.
And who was doing the casting?
That was Joseph Smith.
And who was he casting?
he was casting a devil, as they described it, out of Newell Night.
Okay, and at the end of the casting, and was this more of a traditional story of the LDS faith?
It's one that it's usually included in storybooks about the church history and stuff.
Okay, but would you agree that it's more of a fundamental, it's not necessarily as mainstream as it once was?
Yes.
Okay, so it would be more akin to your father's beliefs.
I don't know if it's one that would be told as often anymore.
Okay, and in that particular situation, this is the prophet of your church, Joseph Smith,
Yes.
and at that point he expelled the devil or the demon from Newell Knight.
Yes.
Did Newell Knight die after they expelled the demon from him?
No, he went on to do great things.
Okay, and at some point, is it your understanding that when someone expels a dark spirit or a negative spirit, that they die after that?
No, they continue living.
Okay. Judge, I don't have anything else at this point. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right.
What else could there be? My goodness. Mormons are really revealing how little they know about true scripture, that's for sure. Mini-me.
When you're ready, cross-examination, Ms. Blake.
When you're ready, cross-examine Mini-me. Mini Chad. Look at them. Look at the two of them. Oh my gosh. Yikes. What?
Mr. Daybell, I'm going to start with, there was some talk of who drove a Dodge Dakota. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And there seemed to be maybe a little bit of confusion there.
I believe that since the events were 7 years ago, I had trouble recalling which was which.
And your recollection is that your dad is actually the one that drove it in the later years?
Yes,
Do you know Joseph Murray?
I do.
How do you know him?
He is my brother-in-law.
Why would Joe Murray in 2019, October of 2019 to be exact, would it surprise you to learn that he referred to the truck as your mom's?
I hadn't heard of that.
Would it surprise you to learn that he had to return the keys, get the keys from her to borrow the truck and then return them to her?
I hadn't heard of that.
So your mom did in fact drive the Dodge Dakota, at least at times?
She did on occasion.
You talked about your dad telling you about a raccoon that he'd shot around September 9th of 2019. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you said that he'd buried it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember where he buried it?
He buried it behind. Sorry.
No, I cut you off. I apologize. Do you remember where he said he buried it?
He showed me that it was behind the silver shed.
Were you present when he buried it?
I was not.
And you talked about having some concerns about your mom getting winded. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Did you ever share those concerns with law enforcement or the coroner or deputy coroner that showed up on the day of your mother's passing?
I don't recall.
Did you ever share those concerns with law enforcement?
I wouldn't have considered losing your breath to be something law enforcement would be worried about.
At some point, did you learn that an autopsy was going to be conducted on your mom?
I did after I had learned she had been exhumed.
And even with an autopsy being performed, you didn't think that it might be something law enforcement would want to know?
I assumed they would find it.
Did you ever shoot paintball guns with your mom?
I did not.
Did you ever see her with a paintball gun?
I did not.
Did you ever see her with an assault rifle?
I did not.
Would it surprise you if Deputy Cannon said he was never shown an image of a paintball gun on October 9th of 2019?
It would, because he was there.
I think you testified that initially when your mom came running in, you were upset.
Yes.
Is it fair to say you wanted to catch whoever this was that had pointed some kind of a gun at her?
Yes, I wanted to catch them.
When you ran outside, did you see anyone?
I did not. It was so dark that I couldn't. Yeah, he could have been anywhere.
And you said it was so dark that night?
When I went out, yes.
And you were asked about the events of October 19th of 2019 from counsel. Do you recall that?
Yes.
I want to back up a little bit. Do you recall when you got home from work?
It was a little after 1.
And what did you do when you got home from work?
I pulled into the driveway, went in the house, and got ready for bed. And then, as I said earlier, I watched YouTube for a few hours.
Did you see either of your parents when you got home?
They were both in bed.
And how did you know they were both in bed?
I saw their forms, their shapes in the bed as I passed by their room.
Did you go in and talk to them?
I did not. They were asleep.
You say they were asleep, but did you actually go in the room?
I assumed they were asleep.
So 2 bodies lying in the bed.
Yes.
Anyone else in the house when you got home?
It was just us.
What woke you up on the morning of October 19th of 2019?
I thought I heard a thump, and then I heard my dad say, "Garth, come help."
And when you went in the room, well, let me back up. Did you in fact go in the room?
I did.
What did you see when you got in there?
I saw her halfway off the bed with her legs still entangled in the blankets.
And what action, if any, did you take at that time?
I immediately thought she needs my help, so I lifted her immediately back up into the bed.
Were you close with your mom?
Extremely close.
And counsel talked to you about May 7th of 2021. Do you recall that?
I do.
Do you recall law enforcement actually knocking on your door?
I do not. They waited till I was at my car.
And do you recall when you got to the police station that they left the door open to the interview room?
They did.
And do you recall that they immediately told you they'd call your attorney?
I believe I had to ask for one.
And did your attorney in fact show up?
A few hours later,
And was your attorney present for questioning?
he was.
Did law enforcement actually get you breakfast?
They did buy me some McDonald's. They offered and I accepted.
And prior to May 7th, had you had a meeting with law enforcement where they had talked to you about the results of your mom's autopsy?
Yes, Detective Aikamanu and a FBI agent came to my classroom after school.
And when they talked to you, were you willing to hear them out on the results?
They did tell me the results.
And do you recall on May 7th going over that autopsy again?
I did not.
Do you recall one of the detectives telling you that your mother's death
Sustained.
Do you recall talking to an individual named Micaiah Bagelin and telling him you found your mom dead in her bed and your dad gone?
I don't recall talking to him about that.
Do you recall talking to Cara Briggs, who's now Cara Daybell, and Emma Moss about finding your mom on the couch?
I told Kara. She's now my wife.
And there was talk of some testimony at some grand juries. Do you recall that? Sorry, let me back up. Let me rephrase that. Do you recall counsel asking you about having testified at a couple proceedings?
Sorry, I don't quite know the rules, but when you were talking to me about Kara and Emma, can you repeat that question? I don't know if that.
Yes. Do you recall telling Cara and or Emma about finding your mom on the couch?
I did not tell them that she was on the couch.
Do you recall having talked to one or both of them?
I do. I had told them that the night before I had seen her on the couch as she said goodbye to me.
And if they were to say something different, would that surprise you?
I mean, I've heard that before.
And then do you recall counsel talking to you about you having testified at a couple grand jury proceedings?
Yes.
And are you aware that the second grand jury was held based on the request of the first grand jury?
Judge, I'm going to object. That calls for speculation.
I'm asking her if he's
Argumentative,
aware.
Judge.
Well, the question
There's no
is,
foundation.
yes, just the question is whether he's aware. You can answer.
Are you aware that the second grand jury was conducted based on the request of the first grand jury?
I was not aware of that.
And counsel asked you about Joseph Smith in a casting. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And what did you indicate happened to the person that they were casting on?
He continued to live on and lived his life.
Are you aware of your mom having been designated as being possessed?
I had not heard that before.
Had you ever heard of J.J. Vallow being designated as being possessed?
I had not heard that.
What about Tylee Ryan?
I had not heard that.
Is your mom still alive?
She is not.
Do you know where the remains of Tylee Ryan and J.J. Vallow were located?
They were found in the backyard.
And when you say the backyard, whose backyard?
My father's.
I have no further questions.
All right. Redirect, Mr. Pryor.
Garth, regardless of what the first grand jury may or may not have believed, did you understand that the second grand jury was convened to determine whether or not you were being untruthful in any way and whether you should face perjury charges?
And that's the way I understood it.
Okay. And again, who brought that grand jury against you?
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
Sustained.
Okay. And your recollection and your belief is that you were not indicted by the grand jury, correct?
That is correct.
And did you feel like that someone was in trying to intimidate or threaten you to change your testimony?
I do, yes.
And who would that be?
Madison and Fremont County.
Judge, that's all I have at this point. And Judge, we need to sidebar just very briefly.
Very
And,
well.
Your Honor, before we do that, I would request a brief recross
On what topic?
on the topic of the furtherance of the grand jury and what he believed.
Just on that very narrow topic, Ms. Blake, I'll allow that and we'll have the sidebar after that.
Thank you.
But Ms. Blake, not to expand the scope of where it's already gone on, Director Cross, please.
Mr. Daybell, did you in fact change your testimony between the first and second grand jury?
I did not.
No further questions.
All right, thank you, counsel.
So there was a grand
Just
jury
sidebar, Judge.
convened.
Very well.
A grand jury was convened against Garth Daybell for perjuring himself. And somehow or another, they weren't able to get an indictment. That's kind of crazy. The plot thickens.